Hey everyone, welcome to week 32. This is day 5. This is the last day of our primary color palette week. We've tried to change things up a little bit. By now we've only used 2 palettes. We've changed our Cad Red for our quinacridone magenta. Today we're going to change our whole palette up. We're going to change yellows, we're going to change the red, we're going to change the blue. We're only going to keep our titanium white. And we'll see how our perception, our understanding of that palette is affected. By the way, we always say this on Fridays. Next week, new theme. So, hope to see you guys there for next week. Thank you guys for hanging out. Okay, let's get started. Now for today, this is going to be our last day on our primary color week. And we've been having a ton of fun and we've been trying to understand and kind of generate a relationship with our primary color palette, specifically the one that I've been choosing for 3 out of the 4 days of the week. And that one has been titanium white, bismuth yellow, cadmium red, and cobalt ultramarine. Like I've said before, I think that with that palette, I get a very nice range in temperature, a nice range in saturation, and even though the range in contrast is compromised, if I want to tint that dark and make it a redder hue or a more violet hue, a more orange hue, I'm not going to have my complete range of contrast. I'm not going to have my complete range of values. I'm not going to have values 0 through 10. Even though I acknowledge that that is a limitation that is natural to this palette, I've really liked it. And I could spend months with this palette. I could spend years with this palette. I feel that that is the most fantastic way to just get really close to something and understand it as our own. So for the sake of these exercises, we just spent a couple of days with them and we tried to be really focused on what we're doing and reflect upon what we're doing once we're done, so that the lessons from having used these palettes are really ingrained in us and are really kind of etched into our brains, and we can associate experiences with our tools and we kind of know what to expect. But if we were to fully understand the range of what we can do, we should spend months and months and months doing tons of paintings just trying to really push the relationships between these colors. Because what I'm doing, honestly, is just skimming the surface. But like I said, for the sake of doing these specific exercises, that's all that we can do. But hopefully for you guys, if you feel excited about it and if you feel like this is something that really connects with you, you can actually just keep the palette and maybe keep doing future or past exercises that we've done with our project and just use that palette. That's going to be your palette for a couple of months and that would be awesome. What we're going to do today, though, is change things up a little bit. I'm not going to say we're going to go crazy by changing all of our pigments. Of course, we are going to keep our titanium white, but we're going to see if we can try to find alternatives for our primaries and see how that affects our perception of the palette and our understanding of the palette, at least the one that we've had until this point. And we can compare and contrast, which is ultimately great. That's what painting is about. So for our yellow, we've been using bismuth yellow. Now, the reason, because a lot of people have been asking, that's not really a traditional yellow. That's not a yellow that you often hear about. People are far more accustomed to hearing about lemon yellow or cadmium yellow, a yellow green and a yellow orange. And honestly, those 2 yellows are perfectly fine. If you have those 2 yellows in your palette, you're good to go. Those are 2 fantastic yellows. They're very different from each other, so it's not like one could replace the other. With those 2, you would be completely fine. I sometimes shy away from putting Cad yellow in my palette because if I have a lemon yellow and I add a tiny bit of Cad red into that mix, which is a color that I usually have in my palette, I'm going to get somewhat close to a cadmium yellow. So I can actually mix cadmium yellow from my lemon yellow, but I could never, ever mix a lemon yellow from a Cad yellow. I would challenge anyone to try and do that. I think it's impossible. So you can get kind of close, if anything, but I'm sure that if you put enough white in that Cad yellow just to really lighten it up and then just start adding some green, like a very cool green to it, just tiny bits of green, you could get something close to a yellow green. But honestly, because there's so much orange in that Cad yellow, if you start adding anything like blue or a green blue, what you're going to end up doing is graying out your color. So yeah, you're probably going to get like a yellow green hue, I would say like a gray yellow green, but you're never going to get close to an actual yellow green pigment like lemon yellow. So for today, I wanted to try, let me get it because I forgot the name. It's a LeFranc color and it's called Japanese Yellow Lemon. And I felt it was kind of weird because when I saw it, I was for sure this is probably like a cadmium lemon, maybe, because it is a little bit more towards the orange than a traditional lemon yellow. So I was like, yeah, I'm gonna try this out. For me, it's actually closer to a cadmium yellow light. So let's associate it with that color. But if we're being true to the brand and to the name of the color, to the name that they are giving that color, it's going to be, again, Japanese Yellow Lemon. It's a LeFranc color. So we're going to use that. And for our red, we are kind of going to hint at the experiences that we had on Tuesday for Spanish Tuesday, Martes Español. And we are going to bring a very cool red, probably the coolest red that we can put in our palette, which is Alizarin Crimson. Now, remember, I use Alizarin Crimson, traditional Alizarin Crimson. It is a very fragile color. It is very, very prone to fading. Particularly if you put it in sunlight, it will degrade the color very, very quickly. But I love it. I love it over permanent alizarin crimson. I actually feel the difference, and I've always leaned towards my alizarin. I actually think it's a beautiful, beautiful color. And when you pair it with cadmium red, you have such a gorgeous spectrum of all the possibilities that you can get with the red hue that I'm like, those two guys are almost always in my palette. If I think back to 24, 25 years of painting, I think they haven't left my palette. I think those two colors have never left my palette. And there's a reason for it. I just find them absolutely necessary when painting. So we are going to give up our quinacridone magenta. That was a beautiful color. I am actually super happy that I'm giving myself the opportunity to experiment with it. I wanted to see if I could replace my alizarin with that magenta. I don't know if I'm still there. I mean, it still very much so behaves like a magenta, but to me, alizarin is so close to my heart, and I like the things that magenta can do, specifically in the rosish hues, and because it is really nice and saturated. But I don't know. I'm gonna have a hard time just saying, yeah, you can replace alizarin. I've been trying that out in past weeks without telling you guys. I've been using that color, although some of you guys noticed it. But I don't know. When I look at my alizarin, I feel I've been unfaithful to it, and I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna put you back in the palette. This was just a fling. Don't worry about it. Our relationship's strong enough. We will survive. So alizarin is back in the palette. And ultramarine blue is actually going to take the place of the cobalt ultramarine. I have had a really, really amazing bond with ultramarine blue. I have never been too keen of using really weird blues. I remember when I used to study, we had cerulean, cobalt, ultramarine, and Prussian blue. I mean, that's an insane range of blues. That's more blue than you will ever need in your life. But I've noticed that cobalt teal is something that people use now, and it's become super, super popular, especially when plein air painters are searching for that beautiful, light blue, super saturated, sunny day sky. They really want something that can pack a heavier punch than cerulean blue, which I feel it's a gorgeous, gorgeous blue. But to me, I don't know, part of my understanding that I wanted to eliminate a bunch of unnecessary variables, again, to me, in my painting practice, led me to look at ultramarine blue and say, yeah, you're like, the one blue that I would need. You're dark and you're kind of transparent. You're very velvety, very, very cool. It is a blue violet, so we won't have access to those very nice warmer blues. Cobalt is brighter and more saturated. Cerulean is a far lighter and far more saturated blue that leans a little bit towards a blue-green. So I gave all those up, and nowadays I've been kind of rescuing my cobalt blue, which I do feel is a fantastic color. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous blue, and perhaps it has a nicer and wider range because of its brightness, because of its saturation, than ultramarine. But there's something very kind of humble and, workhorse like in the nature of ultramarine blue that I just kind of respect and like. And I just feel that it is a blue that it has like a quiet personality and it's very, very strong, but it's never going to be overpowering. It's not like phthalo or Prussian. Those are crazy blues. I mean, people that use those blues are nuts, in my opinion. I mean, I would never mingle with them in a party. So, but there's something quite solemn about ultramarine blue. And historically, and I've said this before, I just love the fact that nowadays it's just such like a nothing blue, and it's so overlooked by so many painters that we tend to forget that that was the blue that replaced lapis lazuli, and which was one of the most expensive pigments in all of painting history. So I just like that. I like that we have come to terms with that hue of that blue, and now it's such an accessible pigment that we even take it for granted. So I just love that it has a place in my palette. So if you look at the palette today, definitely cool. There's no way around it because we're going to have three of the coolest pigments that we could ever put in our palette, which are titanium white, alizarin crimson, and ultramarine blue. Now, here comes the kind of fishy part that I was referring to with this lemon yellow. It's not really a lemon yellow. This is like a problem that I have usually with these houses that produce paint, where they can actually call a paint whatever they want. So they could probably just say, yeah, this is Colombian lemon yellow. Let's just call it that. I am Colombian. I won't find that offensive. So, and even though you would believe that it is a lemon yellow and it would be a light yellow green, if I was producing that color, I don't have to do that. Like, I don't have to answer to anything. I could just mix whatever yellow I want, and I can justify it by saying, yeah, that's my interpretation of it. So just suck it up, and if you like it, use it. And that's it. The name is quite misleading, I feel. That's why I tend to go for colors that can be understood in a very singular way. So let's say Cad Red Medium, I can actually picture that in my head. And even though the handling properties of the paint can change from manufacturer to manufacturer, I'm probably going to be in the ballpark of knowing exactly what that color is. If I say ultramarine blue, I can imagine exactly what it is. If I say alizarin crimson, I can imagine what it is. But sometimes, these names can be a little bit weird and we don't know what we're getting. That's probably why I didn't use this color that much. But like I said, even though it's called a lemon yellow, I would say it's closer to a Cad Lemon Yellow. So it has some cadmium in it. It has a yellow orange, a tiny little bit of yellow orange in it. And that would make our palette a tiny bit warmer than if it were really a lemon yellow. If what we had was titanium white, lemon yellow, alizarin, and ultramarine, my God, that would be a super, super cool palette. There would be no way around it. But because this is actually a Cad Lemon Yellow, we're going to have access to a tiny bit of warmness in our palette. And because I recognized that right from the beginning, I was like, yeah, this painting of Butter High, I'm going to really push that warmness, that apparent warmness, and I'm going to paint her as if she's on fire because she is an amazing painter. She works like crazy, and I just feel she's super powerful, and I'm like, yeah, I want to portray that about her. And if I can couple that with just this kind of savage interpretation of her hair, I was like, yeah, that's going to be a killer way of portraying her. A very deserving way also of portraying her. So I was like, hell yeah, I'm going to see, and this was a kind of personal challenge, if I can push that warmness beyond what I really have in my palette and see if I can convey warmness through pushing those pretty strong oranges that I would get by mixing that lemon yellow, quote unquote, with my alizarin crimson. So that was the painting for today. Like, that was my driving force for today. And because I was giving in so much towards expression, it made me really think about why I am so comfortable just by almost unbalancing my painting towards the expressive side. Ideally, what I would think about myself is that I want some level of naturalism and some sensibility, and then also couple that with just answering to my painting, answering back to those impulses that I have, and being very, very expressive. Like that to me is like the perfect painting. But I always feel that there is a chance with me and my personality to really lean towards the expressive side. And I know myself, and I'd be willing to sacrifice a lot of the modeling and a lot of the sensibility and a lot of the discipline that is inherent to the nature of naturalist and realist painting in order to access a more expressive side of painting, in order to access a more almost like primitive side of painting. I am so willing to do that. Like, I will do that in a heartbeat. And I think that the painting today is a proof of that, is a side of me that, yeah, I do have those two kind of dueling banjos in my head, but inevitably I'm always going to pick a side, and I'm always going to choose the expressive side. You know, as I'm saying this, I remember when I was little, I would have these, if some of you guys lived in the 80s, you'll remember this, but I would have these muscle men, tiny kind of pink colored, soft rubber little action figures. And it was so funny because I always divided them between, you know, the good guys and the bad guys. And I would just have matches between one of the good guys and one of the bad guys. They were like elimination matches. And in the end, I could play with these guys in 50 different days. But my final match would always be these two characters, these two same characters. It would be like a barbarian against this guy that had this weird armor. Now that I look back, it looked like a weird S&M kind of fetish armor thing. So yeah, that was weird. But anyways, I would have this guy, which was like the Ivan Drago of the bad guys, against the good guy, which was like the Rocky of the good guys. And, you know, I always had that match. That was my final match. Always, always, always. And even though I knew that that was the championship match, that was the title match, I always knew that the good guy was going to win. But I always kind of played around and made them like it was a close fight. But it was never a close fight. Like, the good guy always won. That Conan guy, that Conan, you know, good wrestler guy, always, always won. And I'm sorry about this terrible example, but it is like that with painting for me. I always feel like, yeah, I have a disciplined side. I have a very sensitive side. I have a side where I love naturalist and realist painting. I really, really do, and I respect it. And every time I see a painting that exalts those values, I'm like, hell yeah, there's an amazing painter behind this. This is an amazing painting. But I have this expressive side where I'm willing to just have fun with a painting and try things out and distort the hell out of a painting and just do it for the almost for the hell of it, to see what happens. I'm curious. Like, that's the curious part of my brain, that I just want to dig in deep and say, what can I do? What can I push around here? That side is always going to win. That's like my, you know, good barbarian guy that's always, always going to win. And I think today, yeah, I took some chances. There's obvious wonkiness, but there's need in me to say, okay, I could try and just model that nose. I could try and model that eye, you know, just really kind of pay attention to the eyelid and just little highlights in the lower lid and try to render it very carefully. But there's a side of me that says, nah, just, you know, do it with a couple brush strokes and be done with it, and try to do it and try to get her strength with those couple of brush strokes. And just go for it. And sometimes I miss. You know, the reality is that many, many times I miss. You know, I whiff. I'm trying to hit it out of the park, and I'm like, whoa, that brushstroke didn't work. So I always run that risk, but I'm willing to take that risk just because I know that that is something that is in me, and I have to obey it. I have to answer to it, because that's ultimately who I am as a person and as a painter. And I think we always have to be faithful to those values that we end up discovering in ourselves. That is what's going to make us be our own painter. If we answer to those things honestly, we are never going to look like anyone else in painting history. We are going to be ourselves. The more we answer to other superficial values, the more we get entangled in this web of just trying to paint someone else's painting, or just being, you know, infatuated so much with another painter's paintings that we have to echo their work through our own. We're going to get farther and farther and farther from being able to identify what is the thing that makes us, our own painter. So, going back to my muscleman, I'm sorry, but I'm really digging my heels in this metaphor. But but if I go back to my musclemen, like if somebody else was playing with them, I'm sure that their final match would have been, two completely different guys. And I guess in the end, it is about that. It is about recognizing who we are and saying, okay, ultimately, I'm going to be dueling with these two things, but what is going to come out on top? And for me, again, it's just being super, super expressive, driving character over likeness. For me, that's as clear as day. Whenever I'm in doubt, I go back to the people that I respect the most. And for today, I'm just going to showcase a painter that I wanted to look back and see if I talked about her in these videos. If I haven't, that's my fault. I should have talked about her sooner because she is a hell of a painter. But I know I've mentioned her plenty in some of my Instagram posts. And it's M.U.S.C.L.E. M.U.S.C.L.E. was a 20th century painter that is just a remarkable painter. I mean, she has to be one of the strongest portrait painters in history, in all of history. She was a Polish-Jewish painter that went to Paris and actually eventually ended up living there for her whole life. She does have that very strong Polish painting history and that incredibly strong personality, but she also coupled that with the very Eurocentric French knowledge and attention to what was post-impressionism and eventually expressionism. She's definitely able to balance those two out. She definitely and obviously leaned towards being expressive and just looking for something that was deeper, that goes beyond just a simple likeness. And she just really, really tried to be faithful and responsive to what she felt when she was observing her sitters. And there's a really cool quote, and it's very, very strong. I found it incredibly enlightening about her philosophy when she was portraying somebody. And I'd love to read it for you guys if you don't mind. I don't ask myself whether a person in front of my easels is good, false, generous, intelligent. I try to dominate them and represent them as I do in the case of a flower, tomato, or tree. To feel myself into their essence. If I manage to do that, I express myself through their personality. Yeah, that's very, very strong quote. I mean, it really gives you a sense of the power that she wanted to have through her sitters. A portrait for her was obviously definitely about her sitters. It started from the sitters, but it was about herself. Ultimately, it was about her own sensibility. And it was about her having the power and the strength to say, yeah, I am going to manifest myself through this. And I find that amazing because I can totally understand that that is something that is present in the kind of DNA of these paintings. And I love to see and recognize her through it because she was just a tremendous, tremendous painter, an incredibly powerful painter. So I'm really, really glad that she felt that that was a moment that she could empower herself and say, this is my time. I am going to speak about you, yes, but you are my subject matter, and I'm going to speak about me. And that is amazing. So whenever I want to feel kind of like that power and strength and say, yeah, speak about somebody else, but also find something about yourself and just push those things about yourself and see if they come through while you're painting. I look at her and I remember her, and I think she's a beast of a painter, like I always say. So that was it for this week. We had an awesome time just realizing how amazingly varied and how the range of possibilities that we can have depending on how we want to interpret our primary colors through pigments is just so immense that there should never be a feeling of limitation when we're painting with this palette. There should be an acknowledgement of, yes, there's obviously parameters within the palette. There are things that we're always going to be able to do and things that we can't do. But I've always said it, that doesn't mean that you can't push and can't make an amazing painting out of those limitations. So that was it for today. As we always say on Fridays, Danny and I thank you for giving us a chance to just be your company during a tiny bit of time of your busy days. And next week, we're going to have a new theme. So we hope to see you guys next week. Thank you. Bye. See you next week.